Okay, so now what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about how a muscle contraction happens. Okay, and so in your book, it goes through these 6 steps, and those 6 steps correspond with these 6 steps shown here. Okay, but what I'd like to do first is I'd like to give just an overview, and then I'm going to go into some of the more molecular specifics. So let me start with just an overview. And actually I want to go back to something we discussed back in the nervous system section and remind you of this, okay? Because this is the larger, bigger picture context of what we're going to be talking about. Okay, first of all, what we start off with is we have a sensation. It's picked up by receptors, and then it's going to send a nervous impulse down a sensory neuron. That is going to reach the spinal cord and brain, where that impulse is going to then be triggered in a series of interneurons. They're going to decide what to do about this stimulus that was just felt. And so they will then stimulate a nervous impulse in the motor neuron. Now everything from stimulus up to motor neuron we discussed in the nervous system section. So now we'll be discussing this last portion, which is once that nervous impulse is generated in the motor neuron, it then comes and hits the effectors, such as skeletal muscle. Remember, skeletal muscle is one of your effectors. And those effectors then respond somehow. In the case of skeletal muscle, they will either contract or relax. And so it is this part that we're going to go into depth on at the molecular and the cellular level. So again, what we just saw here, the motor neuron touching the effectors, that's what your book is showing here. This is the motor neuron with a nervous impulse or an action potential traveling down it, and it is going to hit your effectors, which is your muscle cell. There are, in general, several steps that take us from action potential in the motor neuron all the way to muscle contraction. And so let me give an overview of those steps. Okay, first right here, this is showing, this right here is your motor neuron. We've just cut it this way. So our motor neuron is touching the muscle cell. And what you can see here is that the action potential will release neurotransmitters, which will come over to the muscle cell and cause an action potential in the muscle cell. That action potential will lead to the release of calcium that is stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum of the muscle cell. That calcium will travel to the sarcomeres and cause the thick and thin filaments to interact or form a cross bridge. Once they do, the sarcomeres shorten, so this muscle cell will shorten, and that will generate tension or pull along that entire muscle. And in most cases, it will then pull on a bone. So this is the overview. Again, action potential in that motor neuron, we see it here, causes neurotransmitter release, which causes action potential in the muscle cell, which causes release of calcium. Calcium travels to the sarcomeres, causes thick and thin filaments to interact, which causes the sarcomeres to shorten, which causes the entire muscle to have tension or pull on something. And so the next steps, what will happen in subsequent videos is I will go through each of these steps in detail.